Hello, and welcome back to Parley. This prompt was written by True Parley Grandmaster Foot. Hope you'll enjoy listening. It's about references and the Synesthesia cheat code. Mr. Foot begins. Last time we introduced what I refer to as the hypothetical, referential, imaginary, and fictional categories of art, some that you've been interested in exploring. This time, we move on from the purely hypothetical, which we covered in the previous Parley, to referential art, the focus of this video. Referential art can be a lot of things. It's often supplemental or promotional material, guidebooks for games, fanfiction, books about games, anime openings, trailers. The list of what could be considered referential art, or in other words, art that requires knowing a reference to be fully enjoyed, we'll get back to that, is nigh on endless. And most of it isn't supposed to be enjoyed by itself. That being said, there is a strange transitional space where we can encounter this referential art by itself, and that's what I'd like to talk about today. Indeed, this is a parlay I'm very excited to cover because I kind of despise references in all of their forms, and you have done what I had previously neglected to do, perhaps prematurely declared impossible, which is to suggest some maybe good examples of references, where the art being full of references is a good thing, a positive thing for humanity. To be clear, I'm not saying that personally, it is not to my taste for there to be references in things. I'm arguing that they are capital B bad. And I'm arguing that these are some examples of them maybe being capital G good. Not to my taste or not, that doesn't matter. Just that they have some positive effects, whereas I think most things full of references are mostly very negative. We'll get to that later, as a treat. But first, I think it's a more interesting place to start, to just go ahead and cover these examples. For me, because I've hemmed and hawed about being annoyed by references so much in my life, kind of a significant amount even in Parley, but I mean, I majored in English in college, and so you can imagine it was not that fun to try to convince professors that it wasn't good for them to say that a work is good when it shows off how much the writer has read, instead of them writing what they mean instead. We'll get into it later, again as a treat. But yeah, and it'll also be interesting for all of you, because I don't want to convince you that referential art is bad. I want to convince you that referential art does what it does, and then let you decide for yourself if you think that's bad or good, or in what situations. If I have overstepped with my hatred of referential art, well, it's justified in that I think it does real harm that I can explain to you, but I don't want to give it more or less credit than it deserves. I want it to get hated exactly when it's bad and no more often. So, some examples of when it could be good. Delightful, genuinely, as I got a few things to listen to in these examples. Mr. Fu continues, why would one create referential art in the first place? That's unintentional. Well, I can think of two reasons. The obvious one is creating the referential piece as supplemental material to enhance the original. One of my favorite examples of this is the wrestling entrance theme song. A defining feature of wrestling storytelling is that it's an ongoing story that never truly ends. So you get a problem. How do you summarize decades of storytelling before a match? The answer is the entrance theme song that attempts to summarize what a given wrestler is all about. I'll include 3 examples below: Cody Rhodes' Kingdom, which I'll be referencing more, Roman Reigns' Head of the Table, and the theme of Shinsuke Nakamura, Rising Sun. There are many more examples we could look at, but this is a pretty straightforward application of referential art that is designed to feed back into and enhance the original. But in a strange way, they also work by themselves as a kind of microcosm of the larger wrestling story, taking on a life of their own. If you're not at all familiar with this, I can't emphasize enough, for the third, I think, time, these are songs, 3-ish minute, they're linked in the description. Pause this and go listen to one if you like, but I always do it as whether you do or not. If you did just listen to one, you see what I mean? They're 3-ish minute songs, basically, of lyrical storytelling that summarize the story of the wrestling. Now understand, I have quite literally consumed zero anything related to wrestling in my entire life except these videos just before this parlay. I don't understand what you mean by storyline. I don't know what you mean by storytelling. I don't understand like what you're doing in wrestling. If it is I know it's like fake as per se, or basically just theater, but I don't understand how that works or is an activity that is coherent. I'm not saying it isn't. This isn't a value judgment about wrestling. I have literally absolutely no idea. But here's my understanding, and if you have even less of an understanding than I do, like you didn't just go watch one of those, my eye literally had a spasm from my lack of understanding of this topic. I will endeavor to explain what I understand about it. Imagine I think it's fair to say wrestling is not a normal sport. Imagine in a more terrestrial sport, baseball, perhaps. You know, I don't, but surely you know statistically more about that than me. There might be a star batter, the ace player, when they're at the bat or whatever, and they sure do hit the ball and get a home run, and they claim a lot of base. I do kind of know how baseball works. I'm being a little facetious, and they do really well. And so they're gaining a lot of momentum, and this is a new team, and they haven't won before, but they're doing really good, and it's so exciting to have a new team kind of kicking ass, but then they lose right at the finals, or whatever they do for baseball. This creates a bit of a narrative. Then the next season, they do really bad, and it's heartbreaking, and it makes some people feel like, they were never really that good, but then it makes other people feel like, oh no, they got bad matchups, or there was, I don't know, bad weather, a lightning bolt hit the ball in the middle of a home run, and the referee, I don't know, ruled it as them losing the game. I don't know enough about sports. It doesn't matter. And so it builds it up. When they do well the third season or whatever, then they get to the finals, and there's more weight on the match than before. They're coming back to reclaim their throne. This is a taste of what I understand from the Cody Rhodes intro. Presumably, this performer, wrestler, contestant, player, Cody Rhodes, perhaps not his real name, I'm not sure if that's how that works, was in like a bunch of wrestling matches for a decade or something, and maybe did well in them in the story anyway, but only just, and then just barely didn't win one time, you can imagine. And the song to me sounded resolute, like coming back to reclaim your title, if that's what they do, right? It's very difficult to talk about this topic because I know actually literally nothing about any of the things that I'm talking about, which in Parley it's normally like I do my best with limited knowledge, but having like a little bit of knowledge is still helpful. But I gather from the song that there was this whole saga of him sort of struggling to get back, the kingdom, I guess. I don't totally understand the metaphor. It's a piece of story music that depicts the history of the wrestling matches, so that when a certain dynamic appears on stage in the wrestling ring, I guess, you kind of have a frame of reference for it, even if you haven't like seen wrestling before. I think it's important to note that this is probably not going to be most people's literal first introduction to wrestling as a thing entirely. More likely, when this will, as Mr. Foot puts it, sort of work by itself, or kind of feed back into and enhance the wrestling match, would be something more like you have a friend who invites you to go to wrestling, and you go, it sounds weird and sweaty and masculine, and they go, oh my god, it's so much weirder than that. You come see, like, I know you well, I think you would enjoy it. Some of you can imagine your friends saying something like this, or maybe they have before. And so you go, you have some frame of reference for what's happening. Your friend in the car explains to you that it's fake and it's acting and it's this storytelling thing. I literally don't know. They explain a bit. You get what I mean. And then when you go there, you hear this song at the intro as the contestant is coming into the ring. There's like a musical theater, inverse version of musical theater from the Shadow Realm thing that happens. And you get the context for, the gravitas of this match in a way that you wouldn't have easily been able to before. Other people got that context from like watching a decade of his wrestling matches, and you get it this other way. Cool. This is, I think, the key, maybe the only example in this entire parlay of a case where, yeah, it pretty arguably is making the source material better and sort of works by itself, or I'm going to describe it as being kind of like a second entrance to enjoying the thing. They want people to understand what is going on and supplement the entertainment they're creating. So they created something that is designed to let people in to the entertainment in a way it would have been hard to otherwise let them in. Cool. I would agree, I bet a lot of you would agree, that this is an example of it being pretty unarguably positive. This is a good thing to exist in the world. If maybe you argue WrestleMania isn't a good thing to exist in the world, I don't know or care, frankly. But having this is a good thing to do. You're kind of welcoming people in and leaving a breadcrumb trail to figure it out. Just as another simple example, you could go as mundane as something like, I recently started reading Brandon Sanderson's books, largely for my own a thing I want to learn as a writer that he does, that I think it will be easy to pick up that way. But I'm having a fine time for what it's worth. I'm reading Mistborn, and I'm reading Mistborn because he has a YouTube channel where he has a video that is basically just called Which of My Books to Read First, where he expounds on that subject. Brandon Sanderson has a unique thing, not completely unique, but unique-ish thing he's doing with his books. They're in, a lot of them are in a connected universe of sorts called the Cosmere. If you've played Magic the Gathering, it's a lot like the multiverse in Magic the Gathering. The idea is that there are different stories and worlds in this universe, Cosmere, imagining of a realm, galaxy, reality, where underlying things about, for example, the magic systems, his signature hard magic systems, underlying things about those systems are the same between books, but not in a way that you will understand from the outside, and often not that the characters in the books understand, at least not initially. And very few people, but some people, can move between these worlds and will show up in multiple texts. That makes it a bit confusing to know where to start, right? Because they're kind of related, but they're not. And you might learn about a magic system in one book, like in Mistborn, you'll learn about allomancy. And in other of his books, or maybe in Mistborn, I don't know, of course, because I'm in the middle of reading it, presumably we will find out that there is some underlying series of rules that is manifesting as allomancy, but could manifest other ways. Like that's kind of there's a deeper truth underneath allomancy. I don't know. I really don't think that if that is a spoiler, it's genuinely an accident, because I don't know. That's just the impression I've been getting from reading the first book. It feels like they kind of they've explained how it works and they understand, but it kind of feels like maybe they don't entirely though. And there are other angles of the magic, which is interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing if I like or find that confusing. But you could imagine how it would be nice to kind of let people in. I'm sure that we can agree that it is probably a net good for the world for him to offer, if you want, an explanation of where you might want to enter. That being necessary for enjoying the books, but it's not considered necessary by the fan base. I have no way of telling you my own opinion about that. Some people say, like, it's fine, you can read the ones you want, but I recommend these. And he kind of says that too in the video. And of course, I mean, the WrestleMania attendees often will not listen to the lyrics for the WrestleMania intro songs. I had to listen to that Cody Rhodes one that I focused on, multiple times. It was a little difficult to pick up in the form of a song the literal backstory, saga of this wrestler. But I mean, it's doable and not necessary. It adds to it, and the people who made these things want you to get that part of the experience. So they took the effort to make a thing that welcomes you in. Hopefully we can agree as a baseline, and it's very useful for the discussion that's coming. Hopefully we can agree as a baseline, this is pretty unarguably a good thing. It's good that that is being done. It's nice to have those things. It is close to a playbill at a play, a piece of theater, or like a manual for a video game. It's quite hard to argue that these things are bad. Again, the corner argument I can see is if people suggest that the existence of these things allows the piece of media that they're referencing to lean into being inaccessible, because there is this accessibility thing available. But I feel like they usually don't do that. Like, that's not what's happening here. Many of these video games that when video games, you buy physical box and you got a manual, many of those games had a tutorial in the game, but just also had the manual. That is good. Again, I could maybe see someone argue something like it's bad because it encourages the game to have a less thorough tutorial, or even the reverse, that the tutorial is kind of redundant because you have the manual if you need it. But I think we can argue these are minor issues, and it's overall good to want people to get to enjoy the entertainment that you made. Great. And with that, I'm actually legally required to inform you that that is the end of the positive comments about this part. No, I'm kind of kidding, but we will talk about some less clearly good, in my opinion, examples of this happening. Let's continue. 2 cheap workarounds. The other reason for referential art is more complex. I'm not sure if we have time for that, but it boils down to borrowing from an original piece as a shortcut. This sounds more malicious than intended. As we will see, I don't hate the idea. A good example of this second, more interesting kind of referential art can be found with Aviators, a musician who often creates music that is inspired by or about the video games and movies he enjoys. It's not quite fan fiction. This is not a story taking elements and doing its own thing with them. It's far stranger. This is basically supplemental material that can sometimes outgrow the thing it's referencing in terms of emotional impact. And these referential songs are on average more popular than his non-referential songs, which exist. Some of his music isn't about media he's enjoyed. Why is it that the referential music is more popular than his more original, non-referential work? Is the original work maybe just worse? I don't intend to talk down Aviators' works. Easy for me to say. I like the guy and the music he creates. Instead, I have a few attempts to explain what's going on. To clarify, let's just for the sake of argument imagine that we could by some metric quantify the goodness of the referential songs and the non-referential songs. And you and I in this conversation, Mr. Food and I, or you listener and I, agreed that the referential songs were better in some mutually agreed upon quantifiable way. The referential songs getting more views is not a mutually agreed upon quantifiable way that means they are better. It means they're more popular, which is not better. And they are, of course, more popular because if they're about the same vibe of music, which, having briefly looked at his other music for the sake of explanation, I think they are. They're in the same ballpark of music, I would argue. But the referential music has more views. I would say fairly unarguably that's because it just does reference a piece of media that is popular and has most of the benefits of the non-referential piece of music. Many people who listen to a song don't understand the lyrics regardless of whether they're a reference or not. So that's not a deal breaker for people enjoying a piece of music. And for the people that do enjoy that reference for what it's worth, well, they're going to watch it more. So I think it's pretty clear why the referential pieces of music have more views in that way. But I think this is a good point that Mr. Food's about to make, and I don't want to dismiss it. Let us just imagine that we concluded in some way. We listened to all of Aviator's music together, you and I, whoever you are, and we agreed by some mutual standard that indeed the songs that reference things were better than the songs that didn't. Let's additionally imagine that we had not consumed the media that it was referencing. But for some reason, we noticed a pattern, which is that the referential pieces were better in some way. Why might that be the case? I think it very well could be the case, but why? That seems kind of odd, right? Would being references make the pieces of media better on their own merits? Maybe the inspiration takes care of a lot of the mental work, takes a lot of the mental load off of the artist while they work on it. This allows them to focus on different things like technical execution. Aha! It's possible that given the limited time on this dusty rock that we all have, if you don't have to spend time with your source material as much because you're referencing something that already exists, you can focus on other stuff, like making the guitar solo more sick or whatever. You would just literally have more time. I will point out that definitely depending on how you're referencing a piece of media, it could easily take more time to reference something. Certainly when you write an essay, unless you are an unbelievably uninspired writer, it is way slower to write something where you need to reference things, even outside of like writing in the bibliography or whatever. It can often be much slower to like need to make quotes from other things relevant when you have to provide sources, and those sources need to be a text that you reference. I think unless you are a very slow or uninspired writer, this is usually slower, even just like that. And cataloging lore from a game in a song in a way that accurately represents the source material could be very time consuming. But indeed, it also might not be, depending on how you were using those references. It certainly could speed things up a lot. I mean, if you're allowed to put giant block quotes in your essay, that would make it be more pages quicker. If that was tolerated by your professor. I don't know. It wasn't with mine. It shouldn't be that you didn't really write anything. So, I think this is a reasonable point. Certainly that is a reason it could maybe lead to better songs to reference something, songs that are better on their own merits. You're using storytelling that worked in its own right, kind of, again, we'll get back to it later, but then you get to focus on the other elements more. Okay, so that could be a reason. A pair of reasons now. Maybe the limitations of the reference are what make the songs as good as they are. Limitations breed creativity, after all. Maybe it's an unusual kind of selection bias. Storytelling is difficult, and the process can create a bit of a mess. The artist of the referential piece can choose to only reference the good parts of the original and filter out the actual, often ugly, microeconomics of storytelling. That line is burning my house down. That's sick. Just stop this parlay. The often ugly microeconomics of storytelling is the bomb, Mr. Foot. That's sick. Anyway, yeah. So the suggestion here is that having a piece of media that already told a story, but there's kind of two things going on. You have to find a way to fit it into your song, limiting you into a little funnel where you may end up being very creative and kind of pulling more from the pieces of media that will fit into the limited thing you're making. It won't be easy to find things that will feel like a good song in your source material. So picking and choosing with that limitation in mind, you may make something that is good in a new way. Additionally, you can also only use the parts of the source material that you think are good to begin with, allowing you to bypass the reality of the creative process, basically, and sort of go to a second draft almost of the material you're using. You can remove the parts that just kind of feel incongruent. Again, this is sort of related to what I was saying before about how accurate of a reference are you trying to make. If you're willing to be a little bit more loosey about exactly what of the source material you're taking, well, you could be a little jelly. This is fun. You could be a little jellyfish for a little bit, and you can just take whatever you want and make something that is more like fan fiction, but certainly still very different, and kind of picks and chooses and maybe focuses some ideas that were a little nebulous, or you felt were a little nebulous, or for a lot of players were a little nebulous in the original material. Just like with the wrestling stuff, you could pause here and listen to some of the Aviators stuff. It's in the description. I did and enjoyed it, listened through a few of the Dark Souls related things, and you included something inspired by Berserk as well, which I thought was interesting. I will say, as somebody who's played not a huge amount of Dark Souls, but has watched/read a lot of Berserk, I didn't get any of it at all. I think I'm just not compatible with this type of thing initially, and I would need to get more into this type of music to appreciate it or take more time with it. To be fair, there were a lot of examples in this parlay, so I tried to be economical with my prep time. But I forgive me if this is wrong, but it seemed to me that they were more capturing a vibe or feeling from the game, sentiment or thematic idea from the game or media they were adapting, rather than a specific moment already in the story of those pieces of media. That might be wrong. I don't know. It's fine. You can imagine as if they were pieces of media that did or didn't. I don't think it changes that much, but I just, as a disclaimer, that was not clear to me. I definitely got these a little less, but that makes them never mind. It doesn't matter if I liked them. As an idea, this is a great illustrative example. I'm going to conclude the parlay and then we'll get into some discussion. As if to prove my point, Aviators, Mr. Foot concludes, often manages to pull some impressive emotional peaks out of the mostly inept storytelling of the Souls games. Whew. Put some burn cream on that. The Synesthesia cheat code. In some ways, these songs can be viewed as the best case scenario for contingent difficulty. The references allow you to outsource the effort associated with setup and skip to the emotional peak. Due to their focused and openly referential nature, like they say that they're from Dark or about Dark Souls or whatever, you don't get most of the disadvantages of contingent difficulty. Most people unfamiliar with the reference probably won't consume it. Referencing emotional peaks from other places, other pieces of art, is an incredibly powerful technique. In this example, it can turn otherwise mediocre songs or mediocre references into powerful experiences. That is why I sometimes refer to it as the Synesthesia cheat code. Yeah, I think it is worth breaking this down. I think what we have in this parlay so far is we have an example of something we can probably agree as neutral ground is a positive piece of referential media. That category with the wrestling entrance themes and the Brando Sando, which of my books should you start with thing, video game manuals. I think we can agree these are mostly it's not a problem. It's good. And they pretty much just add to the piece of media that they have. That's a good starting point. And now these are interesting to me because I can give you a lot of examples of references being negative, but this is a good example of one where I think it's pretty debatable. What is the exchange here between the source material and the thing that is referencing, the referential piece of media? What is the contents of that relationship? Is it a parasitic relationship? Is it just easier to make something successful and less work? Is it a more neutral relationship? It really makes no never mind, but of course people who like Dark Souls will want to hear the Dark Souls references in the music too. It's kind of neither here nor there. And sometimes people see things as being related to a property they otherwise understand, even if it isn't directly a reference. It could just be a song that is used in the soundtrack of the TV adaptation of Fallout, for example. Just because Fallout is one of the other Aviators examples here. That would be an example. Some of those songs might gain additional context and not even fully have intended to. It just is another thing that the song is attached to now. Or it could be considered a positive thing. I think let's start there. If these are adding to the experience of something, let's say Dark Souls, what's going on? How? In what way? The term I'm going to use, the way I'm going to describe, at least the way I see it, is that they're doing something, or Aviators here is doing something like salvaging is the term I'm going to use. I feel like the best case is that there are vibes or even specific ideas in these pieces of media that were kind of on the page as per se. They are there, but they didn't really fully fire. They didn't really metastasize for a lot of the audience. I know this is true of Dark Souls, very notorious for having lengthy lore explanation videos. Politely, when I've dipped my foot in, I don't think it's that confusing. I think people are just often not comfortable making assumptions. They kind of want to feel like they know the correct answer, which is not very compatible with good storytelling. And so that maybe is partly why. But in any case, people feel like they have a shaky grasp of some of that stuff, sure. In the best case, it seems to me that those pieces in the text that created a shaky grasp of a subject may be salvaged, is the term I used, into a more concrete impression and kind of make an emotional experience fire for the person who played Dark Souls where it had failed to fire before, if that makes sense. The pieces were there, and this kind of puts them together in a way that works for people where they didn't previously. Indeed, music is a pretty good medium for this. You get to say words and have cadences in your voice and in the music, create a mood, and in a very condensed form. Something I always find instructive when you think about music as a piece of media is that poetry is one of the least popular forms of art, but music is one of the most popular forms of art, even though they are essentially the exact same thing. There's at least very little difference relative to other art forms between those two things. And I think the reason is that the music de emphasizes strictly understanding, which is actually often true in poetry as well, but people just don't get that idea because there's nothing else there to distract them from it, I might propose, but that's a different parlay. I've got a lot of poetry opinions over here as a poetry enjoyer. People are literally just doing it wrong, but I don't think that's their fault. I don't know what to do about that. With music, people don't. I mean, I guess it's the synesthesia, right? There's a lot of different elements. Using synesthesia in a very loose way, it can recall emotions and moods and experiences for you. You could have a refrain from a piece of music from the game you were playing. Maybe these songs have that. I wouldn't know. I don't play enough of or consume enough of these media properties to know. They're all like things I know but haven't played or read all of. So that could be the case. Sure, you could imagine like a series of bars of music in the soundtrack of part of Dark Souls being kind of riffed on in some way in one of these pieces of music, and that could really evoke the feelings you had when you were there. That's a very powerful thing music can do. So music is a good idea for how to do that. Also, obviously, it's just very different from what the source material was, right? The WrestleMania examples. I mean, the thing you watch is extremely different from a piece of musical theater. So also telling the story of what happens in it with more or less musical, very strange musical theater. Yeah, I mean, that's probably going to work for different people at the very least, right? So it sort of makes sense that these would like maybe be able to add to it in that way. And as Mr. Foot pointed out, we can at least say that there is a colder, more utilitarian potential benefit that making something inspired by something else can lead to better work. Speaking actually briefly of Brandon Sanderson, a common piece of writing advice that he gives, though it's common in the industry in general, and that his books are a little bit notorious for. One of the pitches for Mistborn, this isn't a spoiler, this is his own pitch for the book he wrote, is imagine the world of a place like Lord of the Rings, but Sauron won 1,000 years ago, and now we have to steal the ring instead. Like, ooh, that's a very different thing. That's cool. But if you wrote it as like literally just Lord of the Rings fan fiction, but it was that, I mean, that would be a different book than Mistborn. But that sounds cool. I don't know. I would read that. That's a good thing to do, especially in something like writing a book where it can often be very transformative. It's going to be hard unless you really try to follow the exact same path the source material took. You're going to do it in your own way. Most artists aren't very worried about being derivative. If you really focus on your own work, you're not going to make something that's exactly the same as someone else. It's going to be in your own way. Just sleep soundly at night, and so you can. That's an interesting thing about reading that book. You can kind of, it's very, very loose, but you can sort of feel, oh yeah, there's it like you wanted a dark interpretation of that environment or world. Cool. What a great thing. And that could lead to writing a better book in this example. Yeah, I mean, that's probably intuitive for a lot of people, right? If I say use a template to write, you have to do National Novel Writing Month, you got to write 50,000 words, you got to write a book. You've never wrote a book. You listening right now, you got to go do that. But I say, I want you to copy the template of Star Wars, but don't make it a space opera and make your own magic system, basically. And that's your project to do. Hopefully, it's easier to do that than to do it with, I say you have to have no structure. I'm going to police your mind, and if you have any structure, I delete it. Having a structure already is going to make it easier, right? So sure, in a very cold utilitarian way too, referencing another piece of media may make it easier to make a good piece of media so long as you genuinely intend to make an original piece of media like on top of that source material, which I feel like these songs do. I don't know. I don't think that these are that derivative. They feel like they just are songs that also were inspired by this piece of media. Again, I might just not know. My personal opinion is that these Aviators examples sound to me more like they are it's almost too much to say that they are referential works. They have little to do with the source material from my perspective, but that could be wrong. Again, you could imagine if they did have more to do with it, that would be fine. It doesn't 100% matter. I could give other examples. We could have things like, for example, some anime opening themes are a song written specifically for the anime, and therefore the lyrics are about the plot of the anime. Most aren't. Usually it's actually a pretty big thing in the anime's, funding and financial model, that you can find a way to give an artist the kind of early boost, or it will be a huge expense and they have to hire on a really famous artist. But that's a big part of it. Often it is a song that is just a song in the culture otherwise. But sometimes the song is something that was made for the anime and is about the anime. A very strange example that I'm exposed to sometimes is that Arknights, the mobile game Arknights, has a like recording studio, and so they release rather a lot of music about the characters in the game, often sung or written from the point of view of the character, basically. But these pieces of music are rather separate from the game as a whole. I mean, you wouldn't know how they were related to the characters in the game at all as the average player of the game. If you read through all of the story and read through the voice lines of the characters, listened through the voice lines, and knew everything about a character, sure, you might have context for what that has to do with them, but it's often a creative interpretation as well. They're not directly related to the game. They are inspired by the game. They're referential in a more literal sense, but are they derivative is maybe the term I'm looking for. I don't think they are very. And I think that is part of why they're positive. They're basically just inspired by the source material. The problem in my mind for this parlay is that I'm not sure I would agree that many of the wrestling thing, yeah, like referential would be the word. But the Aviators music and those other examples I'm bringing up, I'm not sure I would agree that that really is referential. I'm not trying to be pedantic, understand. If it seems like I am, let me try to clarify. I don't mean to be. I'm saying that I think there is a meaningful difference between the relationship those pieces of media have with their source material and the WrestleMania examples, or like other things I would think of as referential media. So what I'm going to do at the end of this parlay, just briefly, again, remember, as a little treat, it's a treat for me because this is an open-ended parlay. No, but I think this is productive. I am going to briefly talk about what I despise so much about some forms of references, and maybe that will make it easier to think about, like, where do the Aviators songs and other similar things sit? Pieces of media that feel like they are kind of just inspired by the source material, but do indeed exist in this kind of liminal space. And it's true that, I don't know, I mean, for Arknights, for example, there have before been characters who I was interested in, like, what the character's deal was. It didn't really work for me in the game, but then I listened to their song from the Arknights recording label that exists somehow, and it then did work for me. And then I have that song on my phone and am reminded of that character, or vice versa. I listened to the song and there was an upcoming character, so this is part of the many multi-pronged shotgun of promo that they do. Pretty interesting approach. I listened to a character I knew I was already excited by the mechanics for. I listened to their song first, completely didn't get it and didn't like the song, and then enjoyed them when I kind of met them in the game, if you want to say it that way. It has definitely been that was kind of a second entrance, is how I describe the WrestleMania things. That they kind of let me into enjoying that character in a different way. But you can see how when I put it that way, the line is blurred between a second way to enjoy. Well, that's a lot like salvaging elements of the narrative from the Aviators songs. I'm not saying that these things aren't related. Again, I hope it doesn't come across as pedantry or something. I'm just suggesting that there may be a meaningful distinction, though. These pieces of music, I would argue, are a lot less connected to their source material. So, bad references. Let's do this. Now, I won't indulge myself too much. Just to be clear, the reason I'm coming down so hard against some forms of reference is not because I simply dislike them. Who cares? I would only have this magnitude of emotion, if you can call it that. It's not that much. because I think that they genuinely do harm, not because I just like they're not to my taste or something, you know. And none of the things that we've talked about in this parlay are even close to causing this problem. You could say that now that we've covered these things first, you remember the beginning of the parlay, I said, let's do that first. Now it kind of seems like the complaints I'm about to wage are a little specific or narrow. Like that doesn't actually happen that often, which maybe not, but I do think it's relevant to bring up. You know, references can be very bad. That might seem wrong to some people. I want to tell you why I think that. You can decide for yourself. I'm referring to the ones where the main bad thing is that people consider them to be good, but they are literally just offloading writing to another work you're meant to have read. This is like old English canon pieces of literature. As somebody who, I don't know why I did this exactly, went through the English major at my college, I was very angry at most of my professors for the entire time, and it was a bad experience. It was a very interesting experience, and I learned a lot, so it achieved its goals, but it wasn't a positive, interesting experience. It was like boot camp for my brain, which is kind of what it should be, but just not in a nice way. I just argued with people a lot for 4 years, and then somehow had some friends afterward. That's great. What's up, folks? I know some of you are listening. And my problem was that a lot of the time, these works that are highly regarded in the English canon are full of writers that basically just show off how well read they are. To be clear, there are times when a writer or creator will reference something in a sentence, will quip about something, and you can get it through context because the sentence has been structured in such a way, or you don't need to know, but it just adds something to it if you do. Like, while I would argue that it's not really adding to the writing to do that. Like, I think that is kind of bad. I don't think it's good to sacrifice the understanding of people who are understanding less for excess unnecessary understanding for the people who are understanding more. I don't think that is good. That can be said to be good writing, but I'm not going to quibble that that is such a big deal. Like, whatever, I guess. The problem for me is very literally when I feel there are a good number of sentences in these books that are not a coherent English sentence, interpretable or not, unless you literally go read another book. Like, you have to go stop and go read a separate text. People are a lot more tolerant of this in video games, feeling like you need to look stuff up to enjoy parts of the game. To be fair, you are literally on a computer a good amount more of the time that you're playing a video game, are you not? I don't think that makes it better. I will just point out that, yes, so there's a convenience thing, right? If the information is closer at hand, people feel like it's less of an issue. It's almost like it would be better if the information were even more close at hand, like in the damn book. And yet, despite that being the case, people have a tendency to heap praise on lots of literary references. It's well regarded or seen as this intellectual thing. But why? I mean, let's look at me. I'm a person who has a brain that withholds holds in a lot of minutia from my experience. I know a lot of factoids. Does that make me a better person? Is that why you like me or this series Parlay? This series, where I do my utmost to discuss topics I know nothing about prior, with no prior preparation except the minimum required to know what is being discussed, and then do my best to just like think it through in a logical way. I bet it's an easy sell for a lot of people watching Parlay. Parlay itself is a monument to the value of not referencing things, of not over-relying on minutia or data points, because they do not intelligence make. Knowledge, raw data, I guess, is just not the valuable form of human intelligence. And I think that many people vaguely admire feeling like they need to be respectful of people who've done a lot of work. People have an instinct to kind of respect work, even though there's no merit to hard work in and of itself, and it's often inefficient and indicates that something is bad, not good. But people have a tendency to respect just work. And a lot of these people probably wouldn't really agree that it is good if I put it like this. So maybe it isn't as big of a deal as I'm letting it on to be. Maybe a lot of people walk the walk of respecting works that have a lot of these stupid references in them that take you out of the text and are kind of a place where the author chose not to write and just kind of let someone else do it instead. But if you actually ask them if they thought that was good, they would say no. I mean, when you put it like that, no. And I wonder how many of you feel this way too. You certainly may disagree, and that's fine. My argument, to be clear, is just that I think that much of the time the purpose of language is to communicate information, and to reference something in a way where you need to go elsewhere to get that information is almost literally the antithesis of using language to communicate. That is almost literally the opposite of writing. You're anti-writing, kind of. The text now contains less understanding than before you wrote the reference in. This is bad. Please understand. Having gone through the entire English major, I understand the context that many of these works that reference very heavily, thankfully a thing that is much less done nowadays, were in a time when way less people were literate and there were way less books. It was a more reasonable decision to assume people had read something. There also simultaneously exist works where it is reasonable to assume that people have read a thing, or the piece of media that is being referenced is relevant to the text, but just not really necessary. And I could think of a number of examples. Just a few that come to mind would be something like Paradise Lost. I would say that it's very difficult to be literate and not have been exposed to the source material from which Paradise Lost is vaguely inspired in many stages of the English language, like over a very long period of time. That's been true. And so to be fair, Milton is asking something of you, but it is a lot more reasonable to think that like you would know those things. And you also kind of don't need to know as much. Like, it's poetry, and you can get the idea through the many techniques he uses to communicate those things. That's fine. Whether or not you enjoy Paradise Lost, I don't think it's a piece of media guilty of like you desperately need to have read something else or this is a non-starter. Likewise, I could recommend. Maybe recommending a book could be a nice way to end this parlay. The Map of Time by Felix J. Palma is a book, modern book, about the less modern The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, a short story, which is very readily available and easy to find. Many of you may have already read. But The Map of Time both directly, literally directly, calls out, like, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. The plot of the book is a sort of alternate history. The Time Machine by H.G. Wells has just been released, and some people have a very scammy idea about what to do with that idea, and shenanigans ensue, and that is an interesting part of the book. And then there are three parts. There's kind of three responses to the Time Machine short story being released, and that's what the book is, and it takes that form, and then it goes in some very weird places with that. You not only are literally told that is what is happening in the book, so you wouldn't, like, the book does tell you, like, this is a thing that we're referencing. You could easily enjoy the book without reading it. And third, I mean, you could just read it. There's a point in the book that the characters probably just sit down and read the damn thing. You could just wait for that part and read it. Or it's kind of organized into three rough chunks. You could, like, read one and then go read The Time Machine. Now you know you enjoyed the book and you would enjoy the context. And then read the other two. I would not be surprised if many people read The Map of Time cover to cover and then read The Time Machine by H.G. Wells and enjoyed it more. It was like a different way to get into that. Art is in many cases context, just context. And this could be an interesting context. This is an example of a kind of additive form of referential storytelling, where the WrestleMania entrance theme adds another entry point where you could appreciate the context this way around rather than that way around. And I think this is a good thing. I'm not trying to say that literally any piece of media that references any other piece of media in any way is bad. I'm very specifically referring to when I feel like something offloads explaining or saying what it means to something else, and then the important part is does not go on to say what it means. Like, you need to go look up the thing for context. I would also say, like, while less of a problem, bonus anger points to when you use a complicated word when you don't need to. or a way you can do that usually is very good in conversation, you'll hear me do a lot, is whenever I use a word that I think there's a chance people won't get, I always try to explain it another way as well. I used metastasize like 20 minutes ago, but I tried to explain it as like come together or coalesce, or I even did a motion with my hands because I wanted to make absolutely sure that that word wasn't in the way of people understanding. It's kind of an abstract concept, and I felt that that word was a useful way to evoke it, which is why I used it. But I wanted to make sure that it didn't become a barrier as well, because, that's the literal entire point of using language in the first place. Anyhow, again, it's complicated because language is somewhat tied to the time that things are written in. My point is just that a lot of people see these as masturbatory goods. That came out in a strange way, a masturbatory good, an intellectual way to brag about how much you know that people haven't interrogated enough to realize it's just shallow, inferior writing to making something that works by itself. I mean, that's kind of the question here to me. There are some benefits to writing things these ways, but surely we would agree that a piece of media, which is as enjoyable as these other pieces of media, which is appreciable completely on its own, without significant references to other work, to the extent that that's possible. It's not directly relying on your knowledge of a specific other piece of work. It's kind of impossible to have something not be at all connected to anything else in any realm of culture, but the less it is, I think it's easy to argue, is that not better? Why is it better for your piece of entertainment to require more homework first, if I put it that way? It might be that there's some work involved in the enjoyment, but that is not contained inside of your piece of media you want people to consume. Why is that good? And that most of the reason that these examples are arguably good things is because they are arguably part of the piece of media that they're a reference to. The good references, I feel there is little argument that they are not essentially just almost the same as the piece of media they are. WrestleMania is the wrestling matches and also the intro songs in this model. Again, I know so little about that, I'm not really comfortable making that claim, but you get the idea. It would be like that, right? Likewise, I'm tempted to argue that the songs, because they aren't really part of in the same way the piece of media, end up being kind of this external thing on their own, kind of end up being inspired by it. I feel like it is useful to categorize these things as such, that the positive references are largely a part of the work, that Mistborn is part of Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, and the YouTube video with the recommendations is part of the series of books, kind of, in a weird way. That when you play Monster Hunter, and there are tutorials online from people who've done them for huge amounts of Monster Hunters, lots of the Monster Hunter franchise, that kind of talk in character. It's a weird thing that a lot of those videos do. That almost feels like it's not so much that it's a supplementary work to me, as that kind of is part of Monster Hunter at this point. I mean, why does Monster Hunter tutorialize the fine mechanics of the weapons so little? I'm sure you can agree it's at least partly because there's so much media about how they work, right? Those videos are kind of part of the game. It's not really that they're a supplemental material. They are largely required for understanding how parts of the game work. They might not be literally required. In some cases, they are. I mean, unless you experiment and find out the mechanics on your own. But they might not be literally required. They are certainly a common and path of least resistance, a very substantial secondary path to getting into the piece of media. There's a lot of wiggling around in this parlay. So I don't know, I think it's interesting in that way. Is there meaningful referential media that is like a branch off of a piece of media? Yeah, I mean, I feel like yes, to an extent, but I hope you see my point. It is often going to be more helpful to think of a piece of referential media as being kind of just part of the original media. And what's really interesting is when you experience it on its own, just that like you can encounter these pieces of media on their own. So I tried to evaluate what it would be like to see them by themselves a little bit. It's hard to say because again, in many cases, I feel like seeing them on their own, I was directed at the reference and don't know it. And so I'm not sure what they would be like by themselves. You may have even tried to give me examples of things that I deliberately don't know. And as a result, I guess I feel like I was challenged by this parlay. I'm not sure what to make of those pieces. I could give you I did give you some examples from my experience where there's another way into like the characters in Arknights thing, and I was able to sort of experience them in that different way. And it kind of felt like they were one and the same, connected, but also I could see enjoying the thing by itself, and that really it's a matter of context, or it's very difficult for the thing to be statically connected or not to the piece of media. You could even, let's not, but you could even get into a whole discussion of what counts as fully consuming a piece of media. If you read the book from cover to cover, a lot of people agree that's all of it. I mean, what if you read the book but you like sometimes skim over descriptive passages? That's normal, that's probably fine. Okay, yeah, but like what if you skip the final chapter of the book? Probably no for most people, right? But you did read like 98% of it. So that kind of feels like you consumed it. And you could just get into this and say, well, it's not a complete experience of WrestleMania if you miss the entrance theme and watch the match. Like, yeah, like I guess it's not, but it's more useful to have an amorphous perspective on these things anyway. And so I'm not trying to say make the gray line into a black one. Things are either part of the piece of media or they're a separate thing that was just inspired by it. Not at all. Just to say that I guess I agree with you to an extent, Mr. Food. I feel like it is a gray area. I definitely don't think that it is a synesthesia cheat code. I feel like that is the thing I've ended up coming. I didn't talk about much in this parlay directly, but have indirectly come down pretty hard on. I don't at all find it compelling that the pieces of media do a meaningful amount of that work themselves, unless it's just their own emotional peak, basically. If the Dark Souls song is metastasizing the emotional elements, coalescing them into a conclusion or a feeling that the person didn't experience before without that song, well, it can only be said that the song has become part of Dark Souls for them, in my opinion. It's not really that this referential piece has cheated, synesthesia. If anything, we had to do even more work than normal to get the synesthesia. It wasn't a cheat code at all. And the only cheat code would be on YouTube if Aviators gets a lot of the credit for that breakthrough. No offense specifically, Aviators. I'm just saying that audience member might internalize that it was you that gave them the emotional peak breakthrough, but like they're just wrong though. Like that wasn't why. They got it significantly from Dark Souls. I would argue. It's hard to tell, right? I mean, there's a gray area, I suppose. I don't intend it to be made into a black one, just that I think it's worth considering that in many cases, no, like you do need the other context, for it to do that thing. These can be interesting pieces of media without that other piece of context. But are they at all synesthesia cheat coding? I strongly feel no. So I don't know. It'll be interesting because, of course, I can read ahead on the document and I can see that you are kind of going to go somewhere else with this topic next. So I did also leave some stuff open. Looking forward to the next one. It's a follow-up to these ideas. If you've been enjoying these, folks, we'd love to have you for your own parlay. If you're interested, you can get one of those in the description if you'd like. You can submit whatever you want. It doesn't have to be something like this with a lot of excellent examples, by the way. It can be something shorter or longer if you dare. Mr. Foots often are. We'd love to have you. It can be about whatever you like. Looking forward to the next one.